Our next guest is the official Bronx historian. He is a professor of history at Fairleigh Dickinson University in New Jersey, and he teaches a course at Lehman College on the history of the Bronx. Professor Lloyd Ultan, welcome to the program.
Very happy to be here.
It's a pleasure having both of you and Professor Bosworth on the same show. I think we're doing something very useful for the community
definitely.
In terms of the demographics, and now you're going to tell us all about the history of this wonderful borough. But you know, we recently wrote a story about you in the Bronx Journal.
Right.
And one of the things that we pointed out, I think we have a copy of that page of the newspaper, but one of the things that we pointed out in this article is that you say you were born for this. This is the love of your life. You were born to be the Bronx historian. Why?
Well, first, I was actually born in the Bronx, and from a very early age, from the time I was a toddler, I was always interested in what happened before I was born. And I was always interested in history, and when I went to college, I majored in history. I went to graduate school and became a professional historian. And the one thing I knew after I had gone through all of that was that I knew the history of this country and other countries, the history of the state of New York and the city of New York, but knew absolutely nothing about the history of the place where I grew up and where I still lived, which was the borough of the Bronx. Then I discovered that there was a Bronx County Historical Society, and they had free lectures every month, and I figured the price was right. So I went to these lectures, and being a trained historian, I suddenly realized that the history of the Bronx is really the history of the nation in microcosm. That every major event or movement that happened in the history of the United States occurred in the Bronx. And therefore, if we take a look just at the Bronx, we could ask, why did this happen here? And if that agrees or disagrees with what national historians say the reason for something happening, and if it's the same, well, that's fine. And if it's different, what makes the Bronx unique? Or are the national historians wrong in some way? So that got me very excited, and I began to delve more and more and more in the history of the Bronx. And so, in a sense, it's natural. I guess I was born to be the Bronx Borough historian.
And you were named by former borough president Fernando Ferrer as the official Bronx historian. You actually teach a course on the history of the Bronx here at Lehman College. Give me a synopsis. What students who may be interested in taking this course, what are they going to get from this course?
Well, they'll get the idea of the growth and development of the Bronx from the very beginning. You know, I start with creation and work from there. Most people don't know, for instance, that the Bronx produced one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, one of the principal framers of the Constitution of the United States, that the Iron Dome of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. was manufactured in the Bronx, that the statue of Abraham Lincoln and the Lincoln Memorial was sculpted in the Bronx by Bronxites, that puffed wheat and puffed rice were developed in the Bronx, that the American buffalo, the bison, was saved from extinction in the Bronx, that the current test for the early development of cancer was actually discovered in the Bronx by a Bronxite who won the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 1977 for that event. The very first implementation of a heart pacemaker into a live patient occurred at Montefiore Hospital in the Bronx. And we could go on and on and on and on and on. And this all happened in the Bronx, and nobody knows it. And it's my job to tell people.
But I'm wondering why nobody knows it. What is it that about the Bronx that has kept that information?
Well, it's part of New York City. And you pick up a history of New York City, and it basically is a history of the borough of Manhattan. Therefore, people who are professional historians like me, who are doing histories of the city of New York, concentrate on Manhattan and what is happening there. And I don't disparage that, but they neglect all of the other boroughs of the city of New York, each of which has its own very important contribution to make to the history of the city and to the history of this country. And my job is basically to say, hey, look at us. And I have talked to people who are professional historians and have told them, you know, hey, look at what is outside of Manhattan. And they're beginning to feel their way because they don't know what is available, and I have to point out to them what is available where they could find the information.
And how do government agencies call you up when they need information, when they need... I mean, what kind of service do you provide, like, for example, the borough president's office, if they need something, some background and stuff?
Well, I am appointed by the borough president. I was reappointed by Adolfo Carrion, the current borough president.
This is a non-paid position, by the way.
yeah, I always like to say that it's established by New York State law, and by New York State law, I get a six-figure salary. Unfortunately, by New York State law, all six figures are zero. Yes, the borough president's office calls me up. Other offices of the city and the state call me up. I get calls from newspapers and television and radio news shows who need the historic background to a particular story. I get communications from people from all over the world who need to know some sort of background to the history of the Bronx. I also write the history. I've written 8 books about the Bronx. I write generally somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 60 articles about the Bronx every year in newspapers. I lecture to various groups around the Bronx and elsewhere, and I give tours about the,
walking tours, right?
Walking tours of
Several
various
different neighborhoods?
different neighborhoods, yes. I'll
Saturday mornings is when you do this. I've been reading up on you.
Well, sometimes I do it Saturday morning, sometimes Saturday afternoon, sometimes on Sundays. I do it on those days, and I point out the various things that are involved, and it opens up people's eyes of the richness of the heritage that we all share in the Bronx. I always like to say that that there's a history of the Bronx on practically every street corner.
One of the things that we also should mention is that some major historical events occurred here in the Bronx.
Oh, sure.
You mentioned some of the scientific discoveries and all
Right.
that, but I mean, you yourself, when you were a kid, you saw with your own eyes former presidents in the Bronx.
Oh, yes. Well, my earliest memory is when I was 2 years old, when I saw Franklin Roosevelt coming up the Grand Concourse. And I also, on the Grand Concourse, saw Harry Truman and John F. Kennedy on the Grand Concourse. And we have also had, while I didn't see them personally, of course, Jimmy Carter came and walked the devastation of Charlotte Street that immediately was projected around the world, that gave the Bronx its current negative image in the various areas. But we've also had people who came from the Bronx who are very significant. If you just take just off the top of the head authors, Edgar Allan Poe lived in the Bronx.
Wow.
So did Mark Twain. One of the greatest author in the Yiddish language, Sholem Aleichem, who wrote the stories upon which Fiddler on the Roof is based, lived in the Bronx. E.L. Doctorow, who wrote Ragtime. Herman Wouk, who wrote The Caine Mutiny, all came from the Bronx. John Patrick Shanley, who won the Pulitzer Prize for the play Doubt, came from the Bronx, and that play is set in the Bronx. Clifford Odets, who wrote Awake and Sing, which is set in the neighborhood he grew up in the Bronx. And those are just authors. I mean, we could go to people in show business. We can go to people in various other aspects. For instance, how many people know that Colin Powell grew up in the Bronx? And here's a major person alive today who is still well respected. Who got to be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and also the Secretary of State in the United States.
Professor, we'll have to take a quick break,
sure.
but we're talking to a walking encyclopedia on the Bronx here, and we're going to find out a lot more when we come back.